Last week on the podcast, we left off with Dan and Steve discussing RPE, RIR, autoregulation, and their uses in prescription. We suggest that if you haven't listened to that episode, that you go back and do so, as this one will probably make more sense. So if you have listened to last week's episode, or haven't, and are just happy to listen to this one, then go ahead. We hope you enjoy it. The RPE podcast is a podcast where two physiotherapists and a strength coach sit down and talk all things rehabilitation and sports medicine in the musculoskeletal setting. This show is suitable for all healthcare providers, including new and experienced strength and conditioning coaches, physiotherapists, exercise physiologists, and also students of any allied health profession who are interested in the management of athletes and the general population. On the show, we aim to try and make sense of all of the evidence and present it in an easy and practical way that tries to bridge the gap in each of our respective knowledge bases. The views and opinions on this show are our own and should not be taken as firm medical advice.
Hey guys, Steve again. So we were just really getting into Dan's favourite subject with the autoregulation. So this is part 2 of episode 2, talking programming principles. We'll get into a little bit of application further on. Hope you enjoy this chat. All right, Dan, take it away. You were talking RPE, we were talking prescription, in more of the RPE table, the percentage table versus kind of RPE. So if you want to go from there.
Yep. So I'll just share that screen again. So just to round it all out, it was, you don't have to prescribe, you don't have to get in the weeds and prescribe RPE. That's not, you don't want to make it more difficult for whoever you're prescribing your program to. Whether or not, and we've spoken about this before, whether or not you prescribe a percentage versus a repetitions performed, you're performing RPE, or you're having reps in reserve anyway.
RPE and reps in reserve, auto-regulation stuff exists whether you want to track it or not. It's a variable, it's there kind of thing.
Yeah, if you perform a for whatever reason you're performing a one repetition at 87%, you know that's not near 100. Like, you know that they're going to do that and go, definitely was a 3 RM or something like that, or a 4 RM. So one way that's actually a practical way that I used to measure this, if I perform, say, if I want someone to perform 3 reps or a 3 rep max, so that's a 91%, that I'll use that as their measure for their strength. So if for instance, one day they did 100 kilos for 3 reps and that was their 1 RM, maybe another day they did it for 5 reps, or a couple of weeks later they did it for 5 reps. So you generally know within that they're getting stronger and their performance is increased, and you don't have the risk of going to a 1 RM. So I would rarely perform a 1 RM test if they're not skilled for that.
I was just about to ask you, for your prescription of your percentages, I guess, are you testing maximal effort stuff, or are you using this table to get your calculation, a calculated or estimated repetition maximum that then you're working your weight backwards off?
Yeah, the latter. Because using it, I'll try and steer away from this sort of region especially if you're talking general population clients and return from injury. It's just a nice way for you as the coach to have a bit of eyes up coaching, or eyes up. So instead of sort of just counting the reps, looking for anything, I like to know how it looks, but I don't. You sort of get to know the athlete, get to know when they're sort of nearing their max. So to them, it might have been a 10, and they might have perceived it as a 10. You yourself know that they definitely looked very, very good and had at least however many reps that they had left.
Do you use the bar velocity, even though if you're not directly measuring it, but you can kind of, once you've been doing this for long enough, I know that that's what I do as well. When someone, as we're learning this RPE together, because with each client, I prescribe slightly different. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I do use RPE in prescription, but it's more because of the background and the clientele and the whatever that I have now. But still, as we're learning this together, because I think each time you do it with someone, you learn a little bit more. I will use my perceived kind of bar velocities with them to kind of help them anchor the RPE stuff as we're going. So yes, if they're saying, you know, that was a 10 out of 10 effort and you saw that that bar was still flying up kind of thing, even though if it looked hard, it's still, then you can kind of couch them over this learning process of being, you know, was that actually a 10 out of 10 or was it like a, you know, more RPE 8.5 kind of thing that, you know, you're just perceiving to be a bit more than what it was.
Yeah, I'll just quickly touch on the half points as well, because I think people might go, oh, what's an 8, what's an 8.5? How do I know it's an 8.5? How do I know it's a 9.5? How do I know this? I use it as, I definitely, if it's a 7, I definitely can do 3 more.
Yeah.
If I got to a half point, it's like, I might have, I don't know. So that's when I use a half point.
Yep.
But really, whether you're off by half or not, I don't think it's too much of a difference. But to track it back, yes, visual bar velocity may slow down. Some people are just slow lifters, but then
some people are slow.
Yeah, just grinders. I'll also go technical as well. So I don't want them to go to all out pure failure. It might be a technical failure, and that might be as much as that I've got a range in which I'm allowing them to sort of get out of there, to get the bar path to get out of the range which I'm comfortable with. Once it gets outside of that comfort zone, I'll pull the set or whatnot. So, because technically, if they're not efficient enough with their technique to get the bar up, then I don't deem that as necessary to run that risk just for the rep.
And you're also, again, going back to, I guess, your SRA cycle stuff, like you're then probably not actually applying the stress that you were thinking onto the tissues that you were thinking that you were. Because, like, as per, we'll chat, I guess, a little later further down the track about your dynamic systems theory stuff, but the person's just going to use whatever strategies. When you put someone up against a RPE kind of 10 thing, they're going to use whatever strategies that the body perceives to them as the strongest to get them out of that. And that might not be the strategy that you were actually kind of after. So yeah, 100% that kind of go to you have like a range of technique that you're kind of happy with. And you know that that's applying the stress that you're wanting to apply onto the tissues that you're wanting to apply it, or, you know, into the system that you're wanting to apply it. So yeah, 100%. And I like that take on the half points as to be like the definitely versus maybe. So yeah, I think that's a really good way to use those. Connor, you got any kind of thoughts, questions, anything on that there?
Not really. I'm fairly new to all of using RPE as a prescription kind of thing. It wasn't really taught to us at uni to prescribe using how hard someone felt it was. It was more just us telling them how many to do. So I think it's probably more important to work with your client or your patient to see how hard they think it is, to know how much stress you kind of are putting on them. Because if you just give them 3 sets of 10, for instance, and you don't know how hard they worked, you might be missing your goals completely altogether. So I think it's important to be using RPE, but as I said, I'm pretty new to it, so I'm still learning a heap with it.
A good way to sort of get them to link how they perceive their effort and how much they're actually, and what they actually look like lifting, is sometimes you might set up a camera or something and film their set, and then they can tell you what they felt, and then they can see for themselves how good they looked. or how many because they might go, yeah, I felt like I really had one left, but they were smoking it. You don't know. So it's good to get them to link it, and then next time it'll just solidify a little bit more, and then they'll always just be gauging at some point, just so they can get the required stress or stimulus that you're wanting. So yeah, I think it's good. It's a good tool to use, but it's not the only tool to use. So
Connor, you were talking about this to me was using some sort of anchoring system, and it is something that I have used a bit to actually get as a way to short circuit. I don't use it very often. Quite often I tell the person, this programming is going to be a little bit longer game, and we will get better together at learning to use RPE. And I'll explain to them that the reason I'm using RPE based stuff or auto-regulated stuff is so that I know that the stress that I'm applying to you is X. And so when I retest you later on and we get Y result, I kind of know that the stress has somewhat led to that result. But yeah, anchoring is another good way to do it, which is basically, you get someone and they're doing, let's say eight reps. You want them to do the 10 RPE. So you think that you've got around that kind of 79% on the bar. They go, they get 8 reps and you go, let's go one more. And they do another. And then you go, let's go one more. And they do another. And then you do, and that can be a way to short circuit. Again, you've got to couch it in this whole, the stress that you are going to be applying with that one kind of maximal set is going to be quite a lot. So as long as it's only a one-off thing, then, your set is only 1. Your reps may end up somewhat more than the 8 that you intended at that kind of load. But so you are applying a bigger stress than what you were in all the other sets, but it can be a way to kind of shortcut the using of RPE. In the clinic, I'll do that with yellow TheraBand because I know that the risk is very low. It doesn't matter a lot. And, I'm getting someone, say, post-shoulder issue back to being happy to do abduction through their used to be painful arc, and we'll get a yellow shoulder band, yellow TheraBand, and they'll be lifting, and they'll go, oh, yep, they'll put it down where they were going to because they've counted to 10. And I'll go, do another couple. And now it's starting to burn. Do another couple. And then that's where, we'll use that as an anchoring set every now and then to be like, okay, that's actually how hard I want you to, not quite that hard, a couple of reps back from that is how hard that I want you to actually be working, so that we're fitting in with those principles that we spoke about in episode 1, the, working twice a week, a couple of sets to a couple of reps short of failure. So that way they know what that actually is, what that feels like. So that is one way that I have done it. I also, so Dan, I use so I very rarely prescribe a weight these days, but that is because more my clientele / who patients that I'm seeing is all rehab based stuff, and I'm doing things, I guess, based on there's a lot bigger risk reward kind of thing there. So I'm always letting them, basically I program using reps in reserve.
Autos at all in 2015.
Yep. So I use this to prescribe all, basically 90% of my programming these days is based around this, because I know that a tissue, I guess, your envelope of function, they have an envelope of function. As you're rehabbing it, you're trying to push that up. You're needing to get it into that, super physiologic zone and then bring it back down, but not take it to that zone of breakdown. So I always program things, say 3 sets, my volume load is 3 sets of 10 at 3 reps in reserve. And that way I know that that person is kind of never, ever pushing it. I've never set a weight on the bar. So with squats, 3 sets of 10, 3 reps in reserve, they'll get in, they'll do their warm-up sets. They'll kind of gauge the weight, you know, say this is an ACL rehab. Then knee that day, feeling pretty good. They'll get on, do the weight, do their warm-up sets. They're feeling pretty good. They'll put on the weight that they think they're going to be hitting for 10. We'll do the first set, and me knowing that this is a longer term process than, you know, next I need high performance from an athlete next week. This is a, you know, a 6 to 12 month process, that it doesn't matter if on that day we slightly undershoot the stimulus, because I'm just aiming for cumulative wins. So one win after another to slowly build the capacity of that tissue. So set 1, they'll go with the weight they had on the bar. And, you know, I'll give rep ranges. So it won't be 3 sets of 10. I'll do 3 sets of 8 to 12 with a 3 RIR. So if they get, you know, less than 8 reps, well, then I go, you know, that was too heavy. Like if they stop, I always tell them to stop when they got 3 reps left in the tank. If they get less than 8 at that point, I go, okay, well, that was too heavy. That's not meted the intended stimulus, because I'm looking more for a hypertrophy rep range. So, you know, we're going to take some weight off. If they got, you know, 12 reps or 14 or whatever, and they're like, you know, I still had a couple more, then that set 1, I'll still count it as set 1. It won't be a warm-up set. That'll still be set 1, because again, I'm not too worried about elite performance that I need to be right on the edge of how many percent. I'm just worried about creating cumulative stress over time to get this adaptation. So I will just use reps in reserve and kind of have a little bit more margin for error, I guess is the point that I'm getting across. So yeah, very rarely, and I program RPE for say my plyometrics. So, you know, I want them trying to explode at an RPE 10 kind of thing, or you know, if they're doing some soft landing stuff, maybe RPE 8 to start off with a little bit of RPE 10 work in there, where they're kind of coming down at what they perceive to be their highest height or intensity that they can absorb force into that knee. So yeah, I do things slightly different, but the general principles there, and I think it's just the different contexts and the different goals of the clients that kind of outline how you have to use this, I guess, auto-regulated system. Do you have any kind of questions back at me or anything, or thoughts on that, Dan?
I don't. Yeah, I just want to think that you don't have to use one or the other. I actually do use the way that you said quite often for certain exercises or certain athletes when they just don't want to think, you know, or if you give them, say you're giving a body weight exercise of a chin up, and you go, just do as many as you can, but I don't want you to go to failure. I want at least that you be able to do 2 more on this set. And so you try and get them to repeat that for the next set. So there are applications where you could use either or you might not use it at all. Like there's no real cut and dry whether you use it or not. It's just a nice way to frame the session and get what you want out of it, and the consistency is the thing. So I've used it the way that you described, and I use the percentage-based stuff as just a way to control, I guess, maybe some main lifts, my big compound lifts mainly. And that was, to be fair, that was in a big team sport setting, so I had 30 athletes to look at. I didn't want them all trying to rate their own performance and add weight to the bar. I wanted to sort of mitigate and say, I know exactly what they're lifting, and then I'll be viewing them at the time, and then I'll decide, or we'll decide whether they go up or down. Some exercises I'll go RAR or reps in reserve, and I'll give them that as well. So I think, excuse me, any application I think is good. Just there's nothing right or wrong. It's just context specific, and as you said.
And I think the thing to get across with this is it's just a way to be able to get the person who's programming to make sure that the stress, well, they know what the stress is, because otherwise you're kind of just prescribing and guessing based on, but they guesses based on the means of what science has told us. But I think this is just a more accurate way to zone in on how the individual respond. Because obviously, Connor, we've talked about there are rep ranges that different qualities, biomotor qualities of fitness respond to better. Like you do have obviously your strength rep ranges, your hypertrophy rep ranges, and your kind of strength.
Probably this is one that I picked up as well. That probably describes it well. What you're saying.
Yeah. I think using RPE on top or with that just allows you to go to the individual level to say not what the mean is going to respond to. I know what this kind of individual in front of me is responding to, which whenever we're dealing with a patient, a client, an athlete, I think that is a more important thing, because I guess my biggest thing is if you do like more of a linear progression periodization kind of model where you're just increasing, the intensity and decreasing the reps over time, are they actually getting stronger? Or if you don't actually have that rating of perceived exertion of how hard or something to auto-regulate, how hard something is actually felt to the person, I don't really know if, 3 sets of 10 at 90 kgs and, 3 sets of 5 at 115 kgs, I don't know if that person is actually any stronger with how much, depending on how they've rated that performance. Because one, they could have rated it a 7 out of 10, and the other, without that rating, we don't actually know how those rep ranges have responded to the individual, or how the individual has responded to those rep ranges, if that makes sense.
Again, I'll always bring it back to like not to get caught up too much in like numbers, especially if you're a coach, a physio, seeing a client and whatnot. It's more or less develop your coaching eye, and that should tell you a lot. And then this is just sort of backs up your intuition.
Yep. So
develop your coaching intuition, and this will sort of guide you towards the realm of where you think you should be, or where you want them to be. Doesn't matter if it doesn't hit the mark. Nothing's going to really you're not going to really sort of miss out too much, but it gives you a guide. It has a little buy-in from who you're training or what they're doing, is they're sort of bought into it too, and then you sort of just progress as you go.
Yep.
But in terms of this table, it's just going on those rep ranges of what's considered the best rep range for strength, 1 to 6 reps, and then as you go up. So if you do a 6 rep close to an RPE 7, that's fairly low sort of volume, fairly low load.
Yep.
You're able to do that fairly easily. Sticking to that sort of 6 to 12 rep range, you've got to be in that 8 to 10 RPE to sort of get that muscular sort of failure to get those hypertrophy gains. Muscular endurance is the same. You're not going to have someone do an extremely lightweight down in this region for 20 reps and expect to get the muscular endurance adaptations you're after. So just a good way to know that basically what we're speaking about is if I've got a goal of hypertrophy, that I know that in this rep range, I need to be this close to failure to sort of get the stimulus I want.
Yep.
That's I thought it was just really good reflection of what basically we're talking about today.
And we'll make these graphs available, because I think that's a really, really good way for people to, if you try to bang yourself somewhere in the middle of all of those as a starting point, you're not too far, you're not going to be too far off.
Yep.
Yeah.
So do we want to talk about now theoretical and maybe actual kind of practical applications of how we would use these programming principles that we've outlined so far to actually set up a program? Whether, like, then if you want, you could talk like right from the start with a high performance, say a footy season, building a developmental cycle into more like your general prep or specific prep into your competition phases, something like that. I can talk through applications in rehab settings.
In the pre-season, they've got perhaps long conditioning bouts, especially if you're in the semi-professional level, which is where I coached at. Rarely would we get them for a session fresh, or they come in and this is the first thing they've done that day. They've come in, they've worked all day. So that is always anchored in the back of my mind about what I want to achieve out of that session. And throughout, so from start of November, all I'm wanting to do is I want them to move, and it's more of a volume, not a volume-based training sort of system, but I'm not really worried about pushing maximal loads just yet. So from November to, say, December, I'm just wanting them to get reps under their belt. I was never a real big fan of testing 1RMs. Specifically, because I felt it's a real skill to be able to squat 1RM load.
It doesn't show it doesn't show what people think it shows. It doesn't show improvement in strength. It shows, this is where specificity comes into. It shows how specifically good you have become at squatting 1 repetition. Yeah,
which for a powerlifter, that's fine, because their sport is 1 repetition of a squat. That's as specific as you can get. So I would set up, say, maybe some rep-based maxes, and that's just to give me a general idea about what sort of load I can put on the bar for the next week, or where they're at, and how many days I've got to work with them. So it's generally three odd days of weights. So I would try and hit the body parts twice a week. So I might go
a 2x.
So 2 times frequency for the major body parts. And I'll try and maneuver it away so that if one day is a long conditioning session, I don't want to sort of hammer them too much in the gym. So it might be like a case study. An example I had was Mondays might have been a heavier lower body session, because it was usually the first thing they did that week. And outside it might have been also a medium sort of intensity conditioning session. Wednesdays might have been an upper body session.
And how are you gauging the intensity of the field session? Was it back with that RPE? So that their field session, they were kind of rating it that, RPE 7, or was it more you were looking at the volume of Ks run or something like that? Or were you looking at how much high speed kind of work?
Yeah, I guess whether it was like a heavy, light or medium week. I'll just try. I had 2 thoughts. I tested one where I just sort of tried to offset it and have my gym to be lighter weeks that week. And then I did one season where it was like heavier weeks in the same week. So then you're not having stress every single week. So you're not having a light week on the field, but a heavy week in the gym, and vice versa.
So like, I guess summarizing that first part of the season is you're trying to build their envelope of function. You're building in more that kind of the hypertrophy style, just building their capacity in that rep range, kind of more based hypertrophy and some skill acquisition kind of under the barbell stuff.
Yeah, that was the underlying principle behind that. And then towards the back end of the block, you might start getting the reps a bit lower and getting the weight a bit heavier. But and then inside of that, there'll always be, so I'll always have some part of it will be volume work or hypertrophy work, some part will be strength work, and some part will be power work. The fader just goes up and down about which one is more emphasized than the other. So I still wanted to keep a little bit of power work, and that might have been med ball throws or something really low intensity than in the off season. So
you and I did that very similar. We always used to talk about that, where we said like to most of these athletes have a decent little build under them that, you know, you want to be able to keep touching on all of these. You want one focus kind of area that you're wanting the body to work most its adaptation towards, but you're just not wanting to, you know, forget about things like power, things like strength, because they are things that are important in that athlete. So you do need to touch on them enough that each little, because when we talk the stress recovery adaptation cycle, you also have to talk that for every single quality of the person. So, you know, you can't let one decay the whole way off the cliff. You need to continually touch it just to keep it at a maintenance level.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's pretty much, I guess that was the underlying principle behind my programming. It was everything was worked. It was just at that stage of the year we're in, depends on which one I emphasize more and which one I emphasize less. Because you've got a bucket of recovery, and there's only so much that I can put in there. So at different points in the year, each quality was emphasized more than the other.
Yep. And I think that's very important and pragmatic way to use this SRA, the knowledge of this SRA cycle is going, well, hey, you know, we have to be focusing on something, but can't let everything else detrain. So let's, you know, and this is how and why you would probably do more of a 2x, or if you trained 3, you know, maybe a 3x kind of frequency. So that way you are able to train each kind of body part still, but, you know, that it might have more volume on day 1, and you know that there is going to be a big magnitude of stress, but then, you know, day 2, it's only going to have a little bit of volume, maybe higher intensity, and the stress for that body part might be, you know, moderate. And then come the 3rd session in the week, if you're doing a 3x, you know, you might be hitting it with a little bit of a different biomotor quality, but a little bit harder, because you know that it has a couple of days before you're going to have to hit it again. Something along those lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And then how do you build forward? So you were saying then you would kind of change around what your focus was?
Yeah, so that sort of moved into a Christmas break period. Come January, when you come back, you've only really got 8 weeks before that's actually playing competition games. Yep. You got 4 weeks before you're playing trials. Depending on how much they did over the break, you sort of have maybe 1 week introductory cycle, or 1 week like an introductory week where you won't sort of hit them straight away. And then the next week you might be start to building towards just that strength-based sort of rep range. But my accessories or my back-off stuff might be in that hypertrophy rep range or muscular endurance rep range. And then my power-based stuff might be as part of a warm-up, as a bit of a primer.
Yep.
And then once you sort of move into the season, I was a big proponent of still touching the maximal strength stuff, but only enough to sort of just to give them that dose that I think they needed, and have I wanted them leaving feeling good, but I needed them to do the work as well. So.
And if you have a look, it's specific. Touching that maximal intensity stuff is specific, taking it back to that principle, to rugby league, because they're big bodies and they're having to collide with other big bodies. So you need that body to have dealt with something that's, you know, those collisions can be a few times body weight. You need to have applied a few times body weight into that. That's one thing that I think a lot of physios going into that like return to sport kind of thing, they've said, oh, this person's clear to go. You know, you don't know that they can tolerate getting a couple of times body weight put through their body. So you have to really work. This is where like physio and SSC can work in together so well, or you know, where you have to have both kind of to know that, because you can't just kind of see what you've seen and said they're good to go kind of thing, because they have to have had that specificity of, okay, I've been able to handle really, really big loads.
Yeah, and I think this was a point I always thought of is they might have ticked all the boxes. They're looking good. They're moving well. They're ready to go. But how far off is their strength compared to what pre-injury? Is it?
Yeah.
Have we covered that yet, or are we just based on return to run? They look good run. It's a discussion where you have to talk to the sports coach, because I guess they're pressing to get back onto the field as fast as possible. You don't have a hell of a lot of time to keep them on the sideline. I guess it's just that, and this is where the physio, S&C staff, support coaching staff need to all be collaborative.
So I might share how I do this very different to, I guess, you, as in how I use these programming principles right back in rehab kind of things. So I'm going to take through now a little bit of stuff based on, I guess, acute rehab into those mid-stage rehab in through to where you'll have to be, I guess, chatting or talking to an S&C coach if your client or athlete is in that realm, in that context. So as I was saying, like Connor, you probably, I guess, resonate with this, where, you know, our frequencies that we give our exercises at and our volumes are quite a lot different. So, you know, quite often if you're having a look, you know, someone comes in with an initial injury, you're prescribing something even at a 10x frequency. You know, you might want them to do it 5 times a week, twice a day, because you know that the stress for that, even for that body part, because you have all of these things like pain and that in there as well, you know that, you know, you're not going to actually be even stressing that body part to its maximum. You know that pain is going to be coming on in most circumstances, and obviously this is, you have to use your clinical reasoning and whatnot, but you know that a lot of times pain could be coming on a lot before tissue breakdown, all that type of stuff as well. And you're just trying to get some work, some physiological work into this tissue to make it adapt. So yeah, quite often, as I said, our things can be twice a day, you know, working more in that muscular endurance type of, you know, workload. Could be a lot of TheraBand work. So quite often my prescription will also be depending on what the person has come from. So if they're an athlete who has, and in this case I do the programming, but if I were just a physio, this is where you really do have to be talking in with the S&C coach, because, you know, if there's someone who they've hurt their wrist or their shoulder or something, you don't want their overall systemic, like their neuroendocrine systems response to training to drop off a cliff as well. So you need to continue to apply a stimulus into, you know, all of the other parts of their body to make up to the total volume load that person used to be able to handle. So, you know, if they've been injured now in their right arm, they still have a left arm and 2 legs that you can train, that you might have to increase the volume and frequency of that training a little bit to make sure that, you know, their hormonal response to exercise, their kind of neural response to exercise, their immune response to exercise, their just ability to handle stress in general still stays up there and doesn't detrain to the weakest point, which is the tissue that you're rehabbing. So yeah, quite often, as I said, I'll be programming something, say if it's an upper body exercise, I'll be programming their lower body exercises, increasing their frequency and their volume to what they'd usually be doing to meet, you know, the need for extra stress in other tissues to make up for the stress that they're losing. But then this is how I progress my rehab continuum using these principles. So as I'm going through, you'll see this is somewhat of like a linear progression of the tissue while I'm still training the system as a whole, because we have to remember that the tissue, if it's injured, is now like the weakest link, and we're not wanting everything to detrain down to there. So the system as a whole is training differently in the background to this, but this is like a bit of a linear progression through of the tissue. So these are the things that I'm wanting to make sure that I can tick off as I go along. Obviously, the main thing with this is you just have to find where your patient is at the time. So it's not always having to start at the start of this continuum and work the whole way through. Your patient could be anywhere along this continuum, and that will kind of be where you start. So I have the phase of rehab, the programming focus, and the outcomes that you achieve through this. So in the very early stage, obviously we're kind of just trying to desensitize things, settle things down, trying to find an entry point to exercise. You've got things like pain and sensitivity around in the background, irritability and tissue remodeling. So quite often here, you're using things like your range of motion exercises, activities, passive, active assisted stuff. You're just basically seeing how the tissue can deal with movement and how it can deal with any type of force into it. So whether it's isometric or just in range or muscle activations or very low force isotonic, so through range contractions, and with the main thing of seeing pain. As a physiotherapist, pain is another one of my programming variables. So yes, here, in most things, and I'll share the research later on, there's both in acute settings and in chronic pain settings, lots of times you don't need pain-free rehab. Quite often you do as well, so it's just based on your clinical reasoning, but in most cases, usually it's things less than a 4 out of 10 or within tolerable limits, and it not being too irritable 24 hours after, so you haven't increased that pain by applying your stimulus more than a 2 out of 10 above their baseline, as an example. Sometimes you want it to be 0 though, it depends on the person and what's happening. And you also want no increasing in any of their things like stiffness, swelling, decreases in range of motion, all those type of things beyond the normal levels. So you want to make sure that you're ticking all of those things off in a really early acute annoyed tissue or system. Then you can kind of move through to, once you can find that level of force that you've been able to apply into it, then you need to be able to tick off muscular endurance, which usually, you have that as a spectrum as well. Starts from isometric the whole way through to, more what Dan's table showed, your higher load, 12 plus reps, doing 2 to 3 sets up at about, that 3 reps in reserve. I usually go down to more like 5 reps in reserve because, again, not wanting to push a tissue up too high. By the end of this early to mid phase, people have been able to tolerate a higher volume load of lower external intensity work. So that way I know that at that stage, the tissue is happy to go. So then I move things into this mid phase, which is like a tissue capacity rebuilding phase. This is where we're starting to get into some hypertrophy kind of work, maybe the very start of some strength work, getting them up to being able to build into somewhat of a strength and conditioning program.
You wouldn't have that 10x though, would you?
No. So what usually happens, although in saying, so that's in the early phases. When I'm introducing strength into a system, if I know still that it is a lot lower than anything that the person has been involved with, if I'm playing with lower volume loads by this stage, because your strength prescriptions are usually something like your 2 to 3 sets, less than 7 reps, so relatively low volumes, and I know that still it's strength for that tissue, but it's not anywhere near that system's capacity. I still might, so say I still might be getting them to lateral raise by that stage it might be a 5 kg dumbbell, and they still might be doing that actually a couple of times a week or a couple of times a day, because I do know that that's still way below the actual tissue. Like in an injury, the tissues haven't detrained that much that's where it actually is. We've just got all these other things like pain and whatnot going on in the background. So yes, you are right. It's not quite where it is looking like a complete S&C program by that stage, because yes, you wouldn't be doing like a 10x S&C program unless you were a professional bodybuilder and your job was just to recover and train. One thing that I want to get across here is in this rehab continuum, what constitutes a stress in the SRA cycle kind of changes as we go down from early acute through to this late stage performance. So in the early acute phase, for me, almost each exercise is its own stressor that we're applying that 10x frequency to. So say the goal is getting range of motion in a knee, they might be doing something like 2 exercises, knee bends and prone leg hangs, and they'll be applying that at a 10x frequency. And then I'll be measuring it each time I see the person. Once it's reached the goal at which I want it to be, so whether it's like 130 degrees flexion and 0 degrees extension, then we can progress those exercises on to harder, more loaded ones. And I know that it took however many applications of that stimulus. Should something go wrong in our programming and go back, I know roughly that it has taken, you know, X amount of applications of that stimulus to get us back to, you know, 0 degrees and 130 degrees. So that's something that I can relay back to the patient and give them confidence. Same with like contraction type of things. So, you know, yeah, early stage things, each exercise is a stimulus that has progressions in it. As we're moving further down into things like the muscular endurance, into this like mid phase, then it goes each exercise, or not each exercise, sorry, each workout itself is a stimulus, and they will just be applying that workout. You know, might be a 5x frequency. So every day of the week, they do 1 session of that particular workout until it achieves a certain outcome measure, whether it's up to that kind of 70% leg symmetry index, for example. Then, as we're moving more into that mid to late phase, a program, a 3-day program may be the stimulus. And I'm seeing how many weeks of applying that 3-day program, because by this stage, it really is looking like a S&C strength training kind of program, strength and conditioning program. I'm able to see how many weeks worth of this 3-day split program it takes to achieve, say, 70 or 90% leg symmetry index goal. Therefore, again, if something goes wrong, I always have something that I can go back to the athlete and say, hey, look, it only took us, in mid-phase, it only took us 5 stimuluses to get you there. So it took 1 week worth of stimulus to get you to that, or it took, you know, usually it'd be a bit more, or in this mid to late phase, look, it took you 9 stimuluses, so only 3 weeks to get us from 70% up to 90%. If we have a little bit of a setback and drop back, I can go, hey, look, it's likely only going to take us 3 weeks to get back up there. So basically the essence here is, once I've found their entry point, I'm just finding where they also have to end up, and I'm just progressing down these phases, applying the stressor until it reaches the appropriate outcome measure, and then the stressor gets more complex. So, you know, it started as exercises, then it becomes a whole program. Throughout that, I'm just ticking off basically, you know, they've been able to go through the muscular endurance spectrum. They've been able to go through the hypertrophy spectrum from low to high. They've been able to go through the strength spectrum from isometric through to supramaximal, like, you know, yielding strength. That's your things like your Nordics, your your eccentrically overloaded external rotators, power. They've gone through from being able to absorb power to creating maximal stretch shortening cycle stuff like sprinting, bounding, that type of gear, depth jumps. Same as this late stage is this real fun stage where basically, again, you're starting with just sport specific exercises, then some drills, and then like right up this last thing. I don't think a physio can actually class someone as ready to go until they've done like full training and being able to return to kind of play or perform in like scrimmage tasks, say in rugby league, or in really high intensity tasks that they've been able to do in their sports training, and that's in conjunction with their sports coach, their S&C coach, their physio, and the athlete themselves, everyone coming together for that. So that's how I kind of use it, slightly different to just in the rehab, just in the performance area, but it's still using the same principles. Just because the context is slightly different, I have to use them slightly differently as I go.
Essentially, you're just pushing up that envelope of function each time or each so many sessions, and then you want to make sure that each session you do doesn't go into that zone of breakdown. It sticks somewhere around where their envelope is, or in that, just in that zone of overload, without breaking it down. And then you can see, if you remember the curve, it starts down with high frequency, low intensity, and then you're slowly working slowly up the curve and pushing all of the capacity of it up. That kind of simplifies pretty much everything there, I reckon, is in that graph that we went through. Steve and Dan picked up from where we left off last time, discussing how to use the percentage maximum and RPE tables to prescribe training. Dan mentioned that he tends to keep away from the top left of the table, which is a maximum weight at maximum RPE, as this has more safety concerns than lighter weights down the table and also involves a greater skill element. The table is also a useful indicator of progress. For example, if someone's 3RM was 100 kilograms and then 4 weeks later their 3RM is 130 kilograms, we know that they have improved. Another main point from the table discussed was the half points on the table, so RPE 7.5, 8.5, etc. If it is a whole number, i.e. 8, they definitely had 2 left in the tank, but an 8.5 means that they might have had 2 left in the tank. We discussed working with the patient to help anchor their RPE so that they have a more reliable self-measure of how hard they worked and can more effectively auto-regulate the training. The examples used for this included using video, a rough measure of bar velocity, or taking the person to fatigue at a lighter load to show them what failure is or the amount of desired fatigue with a certain exercise. The next discussion point was common rep ranges used to get certain performance outcomes. For example, using lower rep ranges for strength and power, and higher repetitions for hypertrophy, and more again for muscular endurance. Again, we'll put links to the tables we have used in the description, so be sure to check them out. Next, we had some examples. Dan's example of taking an NRL team through pre-season highlighted the need to build and maintain a base, starting with graded exposure, increasing volume, and total work done before pushing or lifting large loads. His players would have 2 to 3 sessions a week to get them through, but making sure that they still had some rest days or easy days in the mix so that they have time to recover. The type of exercises, rep schemes, and intensity will depend on how far out from competition they are and the current goal of the program. Initially looking to build their capacity whilst maintaining things like baseline power and strength, but moving forward, changing focus as they get closer to the season. The program and the process of the program must remain specific to their goals. Finishing up, we talked about how all of these principles relate to the rehab setting. Steve again starts with building the general envelope of function or capacity of the injured area whilst trying to maintain the capacity and function of other areas. Initially starting with low loads but high frequencies, exposing the injured area / sensitive movement to gradually increasing load. Similarly to Dan, staying away from maximum loads early and gradually building the capacity of that tissue through a variety of tasks. The stimulus is specific to the goal of training, and that may involve different body systems, including cardiovascular, neurological, endocrine, etc. It is also important to note that the patient's program will change frequently as their capacity increases, and there is no recipe or rigid program for them to follow. Both programs follow the said principle in that we must adapt our programs and their variables to the specific needs of what the athlete or client requires. Hopefully we have outlined the training principles underpinning programming and also how to manipulate these principles in the show so far. Again, we love hearing your feedback and are slowly making changes to improve our show, so keep sending it in. There you have it, another RPE 10 absolute grind of an episode to get through. Thanks again for tuning into the RPE podcast. If you have any questions or need anything clarified, hit us up in the comments, or you can find us on our emails, which we've put in the link below. You can find Steve at the Joint Physio Nunda, you can find Dan at Play, or you can find me at Physio Taz. We'll put all of the links to our socials in the description. Thanks again for listening to the RPE podcast.